Let's go to our overview so I can give you an idea of what I'm hoping to cover off during our time here. If we can go to the next one there. What I'm really hoping is to make sure I can give everyone lots of time for questions and discussions, because I know that there are a lot of burning issues and questions people have. And if I haven't covered them off, I'd love to have that discussion with you. So the first thing I want us all to do is talk about how important it is to take care of ourselves before we can take care of our kids. And I'm just going to cover a couple of brief points on that. And then let's talk about how our kids are coping and what we can do to help them out, because I know that's a major concern for a lot of people that I've been hearing from. And then a couple of things that are specific to teens. All the kids stuff still applies, but there's a few kind of specifics that we might see more in our teenagers. And then this one is the biggest thing I've been hearing about from everyone, is this concept of our kids are home. What the heck are we supposed to be doing in terms of structure, routine, homeschooling? Seriously, what are we expected to be doing? So I really want to spend a good chunk of time kind of talking about some of that. I want to share a couple of, these are kind of some of my favorite things, some resources that you might find helpful, although fully acknowledging that there are thousands of other ones out there that you might decide are a better fit for you. And then in case there are people who are really feeling like they're struggling, I want to make sure you know how to get some additional help. And then I'm going to open it up for questions. So hopefully that's how we're going to spend the next hour. Okay, first thing, I want everybody to take a minute and say, how are we all doing? I don't think any of us have ever experienced this kind of stress, this kind of constant uncertainty, constantly changing world. Literally for the last week, things have been changing by the hour in terms of our lives, in terms of our news, in terms of what we're supposed to be doing. That's a lot to take on. And you're going to hear me using a couple of analogies that I like to use. I work a lot with families who are newly diagnosed with a significant medical illness, such as things like cancer. And I always describe that new period of new diagnosis is kind of like what we've been going through for the past 2 weeks. The first 2 weeks are just chaos. You're just constantly moving on adrenaline. It's one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. You're sprinting constantly. Well, none of us can keep up that level of endurance. And I've really been getting the feeling that over the last couple of days, we're starting to move from that sprint period to the marathon. And none of us can keep up what we've been doing on the long term. So it's everybody, if you can do me a favor, I'm going to take a big deep breath. I want everybody else to take a big deep breath with me. And we're going to figure this out and we're going to get through this. Okay. So as I said, the first thing we need to do in order to take care of our kids is to take care of ourselves. And most of this is stuff that I think you all know, but it's just kind of some helpful reminders. Kids are going to model their coping and their reactions on what they see in us, in the adults in their world. If they're seeing you looking constantly stressed, if they're seeing you spending all day long on your social media, if they're seeing you constantly checking in on people without it being helpful, kind of fueling your own stress, they are going to pick up on it. What they need from us is acknowledging, hey, look, we're all nervous, we're all scared, but we're managing. We have things under control. That kind of message is going to be really important. And we're going to talk about acknowledging it's okay to feel anxious. It's just not okay to let the anxiety take over. And so making sure that you're modeling that yourself, vitally important. I'm hoping most of us learned this during the state of emergency, that a lack of routine leads to major cabin fever, leads to all kinds of unhealthy routines for us. And we know that having some kind of structure, some kind of routine in our lives can really help with our mental well-being and a bit of a sense of accomplishment. I don't know about you guys, but during the state of emergency, because it was such a day-by-day thing, those first few days, I just treated it like a bonus holiday, like, woohoo, I can veg out on the couch, I can eat chips, I can sleep in, I can have a nap. And then we got to the end of the week and I thought, I didn't accomplish anything. If someone had told me that I was going to be home cooped up in my house for 9 days, there are things that I probably would have gotten done and I would have felt a sense of accomplishment as opposed to feeling a little oogie from too many storm chips. And we need to start looking at this in much the same way and planning things on a daily and a weekly basis to help us feel that structure and that routine. In terms of self-care, I cannot stress enough, limit your exposure to news and social media. In terms of causing stress for everybody, check in once or twice a day. We know that we're getting the afternoon news briefings, and whether that's what you tune into, whether you tune into the morning news on the radio, but really try to limit what you're doing, because most people are finding it really unhelpful and just increasing your stress. And then I'm going to give a bit of a plug to my lovely colleague, Dr. Jody Spiegel, who is doing a presentation next week all about self-care. So I will leave the rest of that topic for her, so stay tuned. All right. Okay, and again, I need to emphasize that these are some general guidelines and ideas. Every child is different. Every child's needs are different. End of the day, as a parent, you are the ultimate expert on your child and your child's needs. So don't worry, if there's something I'm suggesting here, you're like, that would not work for my kid, go with what you know is going to work really well for your child. We've kind of gotten past the intro to COVID-19 discussions that we were all having about 2 weeks ago. So now it's more the continue to talk to them, continue to check in on a regular basis. Don't interrogate them, don't hound them about it. Again, some kids are more inclined to want to talk about their feelings and their thoughts. Others are just like, nah, mom, dad, leave me alone. And either form is fine, but check in with them in terms of what do they know? There's been a lot of scary information in the news as things have developed in Newfoundland in the past week. What is the information they've heard? In particular, what is it they think they know? And we'll talk more about teens on that one in particular, but help to kind of clarify in case there's some misinformation. How are they feeling? And again, it could be a combination of emotions. There are some kids who are delighted. They're like, you know what? I'm off school. This is awesome. Why is everybody else feeling so stressed? And there are other kids who are really disappointed because they're missing out on a birthday party, or they're feeling stir crazy because they're used to being at hockey practice 6 times a week. So checking in and seeing how are they feeling. And the biggest thing is validate those fears. We forget as adults sometimes what is vitally important to a kid, especially if we're caught up in our worries about finances, we're caught up in our worries about health, we're worried about elderly parents, all of those things. When your kid comes and says, I'm really disappointed because we were going to watch a movie at school next week and I was going to eat popcorn with my friend. In our perspective, that doesn't sound like such a big deal, but for a young kid, that can be something that's really important. And then we can try to work with that and figure out how can we substitute a little bit. Again, this goes without saying, but provide them with honest, age-appropriate information. Don't try to shield them. Don't try to really minimize. You want to give them honest, factual, age-appropriate information that, yeah, this is scary. Yeah, there's a lot going on here, but we are managing it and we are coping with it. And again, normalize that anxiety. I think it's important to acknowledge that this is a really scary time for pretty much all of us. But again, it's okay to be anxious. It's normal to be anxious, but we're not going to let the anxiety take over and take control of us. We are going to find ways to keep it managed. And then the biggest thing is reminding them that we are making all these radical changes to their lives and to their structure and to their routines because we're trying to be proactive and preventative and not reactive. We are trying to keep control of this situation, and control is such a vital thing to remind them of. Okay. All right. Particularly really little kids who don't necessarily have a grasp of kind of the big picture stuff, sometimes we need to remind them of all the stuff in their life that hasn't changed. So it could still be things like, yeah, you know what, we get up in the morning and we watch our favorite TV show and we still go for walks and you still have to brush your teeth before bed. And, you know, kind of the good, the bad, the ugly in terms of all the things that are still the same. And then, as I was sort of saying before, validate their disappointment over the losses. we're looking at it going, I'm sorry you didn't get to go to your birthday party, to a friend's birthday party, or I'm sorry you're not going to get to have a birthday party this year. Validate those things, because again, in their perspective, that's a huge loss. And then it's helping, kids are creative, kids are amazing. If we leave them to their own devices and give them a little bit of guidance and suggestions, help them figure out ways to get creative on new ways to celebrate things. For example, I've heard some suggestions that, well, the Easter Bunny, how is the Easter Bunny going to engage in social distancing this year? Especially for those for whom the Easter Bunny has not been able to go out shopping for Easter presents. I guess I don't have any little ears on the line today, do I? I'm hoping not. But so figuring out things, figuring out different ways. If you've got a kid who's really concerned about the need for social distancing and people not coming in contact, in the same way, over the years, I've had kids freaked out by the idea of Santa Claus coming into their house, so we arranged for Santa Claus to leave things in the shed. You can get creative with how the Easter Bunny is going to come and visit, or not visit, or maybe we're going to send messages, or maybe we're going to put pictures in the window for the Easter Bunny. Like, there are so many things that we can do. Same thing at the moment, not being able to see Nan or Pop or one of your friends, helping them start to get creative with not just the FaceTime or the Skype message, but hey, maybe we can pull together like a music video to send to Nan. Maybe we can come up with like a little animated, if you've got kids who are really creative, like a little animated bit, or even if we're just going to videotape a whole and show Nan all of the pictures we've been drawing or all the crafts we've been doing. Get creative. And get them thinking about alternatives, and it helps to distract and it helps keep them busy, which we're going to talk lots more about in a little bit. Okay. Sorry guys, gulping some water in between things here. And I wanted to talk a little bit, because I think there's a lot of folks with really young kids at home where that they're having trouble expressing their emotions, but they know that life is different. They know that things are kind of off kilter. Or you just have kids who aren't talkers and they're ones who express their emotions in different ways. Really little kids, you may see this coming out more in their imaginative play or their art projects. So let them play out their emotions. Listen, let them pull out the doctor's kit and have them go around and help cure all of their stuffies. Maybe they're worried that their stuffies have COVID-19 and they're going to help cure it. Or maybe they're getting really angry and they want to find a way to draw what they think the virus looks like, and then they want to, either crumple it up or tear it up, or like there's just so many ways you can see it. Sometimes kids playing out the routine of school or playing house. All of those things are incredibly healthy ways to let them play through their emotions. And you don't have to guide them, but just help support them. And, if you see things and you're watching it, ask them questions about it. Ask them, well, what are you doing to Teddy with your needle there? Oh, okay, you're helping Teddy feel better. That's awesome. And for older kids, again, they may decide they want to journal. They may decide that they want to draw. They may channel some of their emotions into music. You may have teenagers withdrawing it into their room with their guitars. That's fantastic. You may have other kids who need to go out back and get the hockey stick or go down to the basement with the hockey stick and just, kind of vent some of their frustrations with basketball or shooting shooting the puck at the net, where they get things out physically. All of those are just fine reactions. Okay. And also I included this as one of many, many, many lovely resources I found online in terms of finding age-appropriate ways to describe all of this to your kids. If nothing else, can I tell you, in particular, the child therapy, child information world, we've all been working on Overdrive the last 2 weeks to try to generate materials that are helpful. And I'm going to talk a little bit later where you can access some of them. But this was just a lovely one that I really liked, as being just a very simple, straightforward, non-frightening, but factual way of helping kids to understand what's going on. And how do we continue talking to our kids? And really, this is about reframing their thoughts, that sadness, that disappointment, that anxiety. One of the ways that we cope with anxiety, all of us, whether it's parents or kids, is if you can feel in control, if you can feel that there are things that you are able to do that will change the outcome, that helps to manage our anxiety. The more you feel that things are helpless and hopeless and unmanageable, the higher the anxiety gets. So it's finding, well, what are the things that are within my control? So remind them that we're doing all of the things that the the scientists and the doctors are telling us to do. We're making sure we're doing our hand washing. We're creating new songs to sing while we're doing our hand washing. And listen, if nothing else, there's a wonderful online world of celebrities and people having fun showing their proper 20 seconds of hand washing. If you haven't seen Gloria Gaynor do I Will Survive, I highly recommend you look that one up. That's my current favorite. We're doing the social distancing. That's something that's in our control. We're staying home. We're trying not to touch our face. We're doing all of these things that are actions that can make a difference. And then using this reframing, again, get creative with how they're going to connect with their friends and their families. You can almost, again, if you've got creative kids, you can almost do things like a back and forth amongst their friends, a storytelling activity. Listen, if you ever did like high school drama or junior high drama class and improv, think about all those things that you can do with the back and forth. Get creative in terms of how they're staying connected. And yes, it's going to increase their time online, and we'll talk about that later, and it's all okay. Biggest thing I can suggest is use this as an opportunity for all of us to figure out something that we'd like to accomplish, whether it's working on a new skill, whether it's acquiring a new hobby, maybe it's pulling off that guitar that's been collecting dust in the corner and saying, I'm going to teach myself how to do some of this, and I'm going to use some of the YouTube videos, or I'm going to connect with one of the many musicians who's willing to do online teaching. Maybe it's, I want to go out and work in the work shed and work on taking an engine apart. If you're like me, I'm looking at it going, this is finally the time I have to tackle some of my closets. And that will make me feel more in control of at least some small part of my world. We can all find ways to kind of shift this into a positive mindset of, yeah, you know what, there were a lot of downsides, but man, look at some of the things that I accomplished and look at what I've learned. Maybe you want to pull out a cookbook and start to acquire some new cooking skills. Maybe that's something you can work with your kids on. Lots of ways to kind of turn the negative into more of a positive. And I wasn't sure if I had the credit for this one because I've been seeing so many things online. I'm trying to give credit where credit is due. I thought this was a lovely image to help remind us about the things we can control and the things that are out of our control. And what we all tend to do is focus on all of those things that are out of our control and worrying about them and stressing about them. It's like that rocking chair analogy. I can keep worrying about them, I can keep stressing about them, but it's not going to go anywhere. So let me focus on the things that I can control. And again, this is even an activity you could do with your kids. Walk them through what are the things that are stressing them out and help them make that as a list. But then what are the things that they can control? Empower them. Make them feel like they have some mastery, some control over this situation. Okay, how many of you are ready to kill your teenagers at this point? Actually, for the most part, I think a lot of them have been very happy and they've been retreating in their rooms and playing video games and talking to their friends and enjoying a bit of an extended vacation. There are also a lot of teens out there stressed about their schoolwork, especially the ones towards the end of high school or university. So you guys will hear me and I can't get a visual reaction. I will use some humor to try to lighten some of this, but I do know that for some of our teens, this is really, really stressful. But again, listen, reassure, validate, all those things that we talked about for kids. But in some cases, these are going to be much bigger things. And really acknowledging teens are missing some major significant milestones. We're talking about things like whether it's science fair, whether it's prom, whether it's grad, whether it's, a best friend's sweet 16 party. These are things that for teenagers are really significant. Maybe they were, looking forward to a party that was coming up. I know a lot of kids involved in sports competitions, in the drama festival, in the Kiwanis, all of those kind of things that they're not able to participate in now. And if you think back upon your own high school life, think about some of those big events that you remember, whether it was a sports tournament, whether it was a music competition, whether it was just some really cool parties. Now imagine having all of those yanked out from under you. This is some tough stuff. So remembering that an important developmental milestone for teenagers is for them to be spending less time with their families and more time with their friends. And we've now kind of yanked the rug out from under them on that. So figuring out and remembering that at this point they are connecting with their peers is vitally important to them at this point. And so whether that is through texting, whether that's through Snapchat, whether that's through, heaven forbid, on the headsets playing Call of Duty, we'll talk about some of those. And I'm going to talk about the video game and the social and the electronics use in a couple of minutes. But remember that it is more important than ever for them to be connecting with their peers. And that's okay. And that's totally normal. They're doing all the normal teenage developmental things that they're supposed to be doing. However, I would say keep an eye on their social media use. Keep an eye on, again, what do they know? What have they heard? Teens, for the most part, are not as critical about the sources of information and misinformation that's out there. Listen, there is so much information out there. I got sucked in about the lovely story about the dolphins in the canals of Venice because I thought it was wonderful and hopeful, and have since learned it's not true. And I'm a pretty critical, I'm pretty critical and pretty good at figuring out my reputable sources for information. So reminding teens and helping them to clarify some of that. And also just make sure, in the same way I told you guys to monitor your own social media use and see whether it's helpful or harmful, you want to make sure the same thing is happening for your teens. Okay. Okay, here is the big question that everybody is stressing about. The concept that I must have a regimented routine for my kids. I must have, down to the 10-minute interval blocks per day in terms of what we're supposed to be doing. Listen, you've all seen those online. The crazy schedules that, the Pinterest moms of the world have created. Everybody relax. Yes, we need some structure. Yes, we need some routine. It really is good for our mental health. But you need to remember to be flexible and to have some fun with it. For all of those perfect, wonderful, down to the 10-minute interval blocks that I've seen, I figured this is probably a far more realistic schedule for a lot of people at the moment. Again, I thought it was cute. I am going to talk to you about probably a more realistic, maybe somewhere between those two extremes. So here are my suggestions for you guys. You need a little bit of time every day for some structured learning. And again, keep in mind it's developmentally appropriate. We don't expect kindergarten kids to be sitting for more than 10, 15 minutes working on something like pencil paper reading activities. I'm looking at this much the way that I do for a lot of my kids who are, off school for the summer. If you have a child who has a history of learning issues, you probably want to be keeping this up a little bit more because you want to keep their mechanics of skills going. But here's the perspective I put on all of this. And again, this is just me, full disclosure, but coming from my background working with, again, kids who've been diagnosed with cancer who wind up missing half the school year. And you know what? We figure it out. We get them caught up on the essential stuff, and some of the stuff they miss out on. There are a couple of academic time periods where it's more critical than others. For example, the kindergarten grade 1 time period, where they are just working on so many of those early building block academic skills, that's a vital time period. And obviously towards the end of high school, you're looking at really vital learning periods. And I say this with a huge respect to all my teaching colleagues who are out there. If you miss a few months of grade 5, you know what? You're going to get through it. You're going to get caught up on the essentials. And this is the first, and I've been used to that on just a one-on-one basis. We have an entire world who's putting education on pause at the moment. We will figure this out. You do not need to be your child's teacher. You do not need to keep them up on whatever the curriculum suggestions are. Again, with some of those exceptions, and I'll talk a bit more about them. Give yourself some slack, give yourself a bit of a break. I've been hearing from people concerned about, how do I keep my 5-year-old at the table and get them working on all of their homeschooling, and how much homeschooling should I be doing? Again, it depends on the interest of your child. It depends on the tolerance level of your child. There are some kids who are going to use this to explore some self-learning, and that's fantastic. And there are some kids who are going to be very stressed if they're not feeling like they're keeping up. And that's great. Then we work with those. But for everybody else, some structured learning time every day. And that can include fun things, sending out them off to do some reading, to do some math activities, to work on, especially in the younger grades, some of the math facts. So continuing to work on the drills, whether it's the addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Those are the essential building blocks you need to move forward. Some of the other stuff is less essential. For really little kids, again, working on that letter sound relationship, working on forming their letters, working on the printing skills, working on the fine motor stuff. That's all important, but that doesn't have to be a structured, let's sit down for an hour and work on our academics. There are so many ways you can get creative with it. I'm far more concerned right now, again, about let's include some naturalistic learning as part of your kid's school day. You can continue to work on those math skills by getting your kids cooking and baking. Get them to double a recipe, get them to half a recipe, get them to, have to make some tweaks to things. Listen, there are so many cool science experiments that are out there online. Get them to build, get them to do the volcano in the kitchen sink. Get them exploring and excited about learning. And any teachers out there will tell you, this is how kids learn best. Anyway, it's not the structured workbook, it's the hands-on learning. Hey, we're heading into spring, get them to start planting, some bulbs or planting some seeds and watching what's happening with it. And then learning about those different stages. That's the stuff that makes kids happy. Go out for nature walks. Listen, we had fresh snow yesterday. There were all kinds of interesting tracks in my backyard. Take your kids out when you're going for your walk. Take pictures of things. Maybe it's the trees. Maybe it's footprints. Maybe, whatever. Maybe it's a historical building that you've walked past every day. Well, when you go back, do some research on it. Get them to find out a little bit more about some of those things. Find out what creatures are wandering through my backyard, or what is that tree that I've looked at every day and never taken a moment to stop and think about. And help them explore what are things that they're into. Maybe you got a kid who's really into robotics. Well, this is a great time to let them do some online learning, to do some research on it. Maybe they're really into, I'm just pulling up this up, maybe they're into dolphins. Maybe they heard about the story about the dolphins in Venice. We'll get them to do some learning. Again, young kids, one of the ways that they learn best is when they can develop a mastery of a topic, especially if it's one that you don't know anything about. They really like to be able to rub that in and show that kind of mastery of something that is of interest to them. And maybe it's a kid who wants to go out and explore, the spare engine that's in the shed and wants to take it apart and put it back together and learn a bit of those kind of skills. That naturalistic learning is really, honestly, the stuff that they're going to remember long term. So keep them up with the mechanics of the reading and writing and spelling and math, but not all day. I mean, listen, even people who do proper homeschooling for a living, really, even then you're looking at 2-3 hours a day. At this point, guys, you're trying to work from home, you're trying to juggle little kids. Get in what you can and give yourself permission to relax about some of the rest of it. So that's the whole school piece. The rest of the day, though, should include things like there should be some daily chores and household activities. Every kid, no matter how little, can do something around the house. And they need to be contributing. Listen, they're home more. Everybody's home more. There are more messes happening. Everybody gets a daily chore and some weekly chores. What I'm hoping people are going to take away from all of this is the increased and hopefully somewhat relaxed time with family. We lead such hectic, busy lives, running kids back and forth to dance and to tutoring and to hockey. And we've had a chance to kind of step back and think about maybe some family time. It is time. Pull out those jigsaw puzzles, pull out those board games. If you've got kids who really want to do the videos, there are some fantastic cooperative family-friendly games that you can do where, I mean, again, you're competing against them or you're tag teaming with them. There are so many things that you can do as a family. So even with those teenagers who are up in their rooms on their phones, Snapchatting all day long, some time needs to be spent with the family and making sure you've got some physical activity built into the day, whether that's taking the dog for a walk, whether you've got that as we're going to do some online yoga, whether it's making sure you're sending them out for some fresh air. There are so many different possibilities, including the housework part, but it's really important to make sure kids are getting more physical activity as well as ourselves. Otherwise, quite frankly, they are going to have to open up the clothing shops as essential because none of us are going to fit our clothing in another month. Okay. So, and I apologize, I don't have a reference for this. This is one that I found online, but it just echoed my sentiments so perfectly that I thought it would be really helpful. And a big picture reminder, kind of the way I do when I've got my kids who are facing a cancer diagnosis and, you know, a potentially life-threatening event. It really forces you to stop and reflect and think about what is really, really important. And whatever that particular unit in social studies was, or whatever that novel study was, if it's really important in your kid's life, they'll pick it up again. But remembering, we've got really smart teachers, we've got really smart educators. We are going to figure out how to make this work long term. Things are going to look different, but I want everybody coming out of this maybe with some stronger feelings of family, some stronger bondings. Guarantee you, your kids are going to remember the, hey, remember when mom tried to make the chocolate chip cookies and we burnt them in the oven? Or remember when we kicked dad's butt at Mario Kart? Those are the things they're going to remember, not the fact that you drilled them and had them sit down at the table to try to work on math facts. So that's kind of, you know, and again, there are going to be people who disagree with me on that, but I think it's really important to keep in mind and use perspective. Okay, this is the big question everybody's asking me. And actually, this is an interview I did last week with Atlantic Business. And I absolutely adored the headline they came up with it for it. So will days of video games melt my kid's brain? No, no, it's not going to. I'm not saying you should have your kids playing for 6 or 10 or 12 hours a day. You do need to limit and restrict the amount of time, but this is a time where whether it's Netflix, whether it's computer games, whether it's video games, whether it's just more time chatting with friends, we do need to let the rules lax a little bit. In particular, remembering that for a lot of kids, this is their stress release. This is their escapism. This is how they're coping with their anxiety. And also for a lot of teens and tweens, this is how they're socializing. This is how they're hanging out with their friends. They've got that headset on, and that's how they are maintaining their social life. And I think it's a really important perspective for us to have. Now, there are some people and some kids for whom they have real difficulties with setting some of those boundaries and timers. And if you give kids a little bit, they're just going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And it's a huge source of disagreement. And if that's the case, we can talk a little bit about how you negotiate that, especially if you're, say, you know, leaving them with a babysitter for the day, or, you know, you're finding it harder because you're having to go off to work. If you really need to, there are some monitoring systems that are out there. Circle by Disney is one of my favorite go-tos. You can order it online. It's about 130 bucks. And it allows you to set times for every electronic device in the house. It allows you to, let's say you are having to work. Your kid can send you a text with a picture of, look, I finished cleaning my bedroom, and you can send them back a message that says, great, you've got an extra hour on the Xbox now. There are lots of ways that if you need that additional support, it's out there. Obviously, the first line is if you can set those limits and controls as a family. Certainly, that's the preferred way to go. Okay. I've talked a little bit about this, but I just want everybody to remember that this is one of the ways that we cope with difficult times is to, and I don't want to sound all artificially optimistic. Listen, I'm scared, I'm nervous, I'm anxious. I had my little meltdown earlier this week and then kind of regrouped and moved past. So again, I'm being very realistic, but at the same time, let's turn this around and look for some of the opportunities that may be happening here. We're developing new skills. We're slowing down. We're reminding each other that we've been really used to a really hectic, fast-paced life without as much face-to-face time with our families. Not to mention, listen, the dogs and pets of this world are loving this. They are getting more exercise and more company and more snuggles than I think they've had in a long time. And remembering that we are going to get through this. It will be a new normal. It is not going to look like life did 4 months ago. I don't know what it's going to look like. It is going to be new, but we are going to get back to normal. It is coming. And so on those lines, I just wanted to mention a couple of resources. Again, I mean, the explosion of stuff that's available online right now and the generosity of businesses and celebrities and musicians, and let's take advantage of it. I mean, I don't know about you guys, I'm watching Broadway shows, I'm watching opera, I'm learning lessons. There's daily cartoon lessons from a really great kids author. You can go on virtual tours of zoos and aquariums. You can go visit museums. This is stuff that we've never had access to before. So take advantage of it. And again, that's all part of that informal, naturalistic learning that I was talking about before. And if you're really struggling around the academic piece, I know the school system is, and the teachers are really helping and reaching out. And if if you're feeling disconnected, do reach out to your child's teacher. But there's tons of stuff online as well. If you're looking for kind of up-to-date information around coping strategies, around what's happening with research, again, full self-disclosure, I manage the social media accounts, the Facebook and Twitter for the Association of Newfoundland, Psychology Newfoundland and Labrador, otherwise known as EPNL. And I've been working really hard to make sure that there are reputable sources of information up there. So please, if you're not already checking it out and that's something you feel is useful, please feel free to check it out. And then, quite frankly, these are good things for all of us to be using, even in non-pandemic times. And again, there are thousands of resources out there. I just handpicked a couple of my personal favorites. If you're not familiar with it already, Anxiety Canada, it used to be Anxiety BC, is one of the most wonderful resources out there. All things anxiety. There's information for kids, there's information for teens, there's information for parents, there's information for adults. There are self-guided activities. They have also created what's called the Mind Shift app, which I find is really helpful for older teens and adults. And it just has all kinds of guided imagery. It has, again, it's based on cognitive behavioral therapy techniques. And I really encourage you to explore it. Again, there are tons of other ones out there. Headspace, Calm usually offers a free 30-day trial. The other ones are all free. They're worth checking out. My all-time favorite app for little kids, but quite frankly, I also have teenagers who really like it. Sesame Street has produced a breathing and calming down app, which is just beyond adorable, and it's free. And especially if you've got really little ones, it's really worth having some fun with it. But also remember that while some kids respond really well to let's do the relaxation, let's do the breathing, let's calm down, some kids, the way that they cope with their anxiety is to get really active. So if you've got a kid who's starting to get a little overstressed, it's time to create a dance party. Been doing that with some of my nursing colleagues this week. That's how we've been fostering some of our stresses. We're having a morning dance party. Maybe they want to explore yoga. Maybe you want to distract them if you're seeing that they're starting to get really worked up with kind of, I said, where's Waldo, but the I Spy. Get them actively engaged in something so that it's taking their mind off of what's going on and you're actively distracting them. Okay, and if things are feeling more serious, if you're thinking, yeah, this is not feeling under control, a few resources I wanted to make sure you're accessing. For all of the Eastern Health employees who are tuned in, we have a fantastic EFAP program. I didn't put the numbers because it varies from site to site. But you should be able to look that up online or talk to your manager. And I think I've been seeing signs all over the place reminding people that it exists. Do not hesitate to reach out. It's completely confidential and hopefully can provide a bit of reassurance to you. Again, mental health crisis line is there. The Kids Help phone line and text line. I have a lot of my teens who are finding, especially the texting option, a helpful way to process their feelings and emotions. And as a total aside, I gather they are desperately looking for additional volunteers. I have some of my grad students volunteering for them right now. If you've got a university student in your life or somebody who's got some spare time, they'd be happy to have them. If you're really concerned about how your kids are doing, make sure you call the central intake number within Eastern Health, 777-2200. The Bridge the Gap app that our government has produced has resources there. I can tell you our psychology community is scrambling right now. Everybody's offering phone sessions and we're trying to get the whole technology piece of things sorted out to make sure that we're able to do computer sessions. We're just working on some of the logistics in terms of meeting like HIPAA and privacy compatibility. But what I would say is give everybody a week or two and feel free to reach out on the Find a Psychologist, and you can do a search to find someone who's suitable for you. And this is just coming down the pipeline, so you guys are kind of getting a preview. Our national organization, the Canadian Psychological Association, literally just yesterday put out a call for psychologists to provide some pro bono support for frontline workers and first responders. So you're going to see that program start to roll out in the very near future. It's just in its infancy. I don't have a contact number or anything for you yet, but stay tuned. And again, especially if you tune into some of the APNL stuff, I'll make sure all of that information is out there. Okay. A final thought, because again, this is really hard and the reframing piece comes here. I think it's important that just because we're socially distant from each other doesn't mean we need to be emotionally distant. We really are all in this together. We are going to get through this together and we're going to move forward. I would be more than happy to guzzle some water for a second while we're collecting questions, and then I'm happy to answer any questions people may have.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Janine. So I do have some questions. I do see somebody made a suggestion actually that they did a scavenger hunt drive this week, and kids really enjoyed it. So my first question is from Kimberly. It says, how can new first-time parents ensure their newborns are staying as healthy as possible during a pandemic?
I was going to say probably a better question for some of our public health officials, but I think the biggest thing is keeping, again, following all the rules we're being given from government directives in terms of social distancing, self-isolation, keeping yourself as healthy as you possibly can. And that's the kind of thing we're reaching out to the, again, the helpline if you've got specific concerns.
Okay, our next question is from Corey. It says, my 11-year-old gets angry when I remind him to keep social distance from neighborhood kids when outside. Any guidance on how to get kids to comply without shutting down playing at a safe distance?
That is such a tough one because, again, it seems really unfair. I have some families who've turned it into, again, trying to channel it as opposed to disciplining it and saying, no, if you don't do that, you know, you have to come in. It's the, well, what games can we create where everybody has to stay one hockey stick away from each other? Get them to start thinking about what are some ways that they can maybe change up some of the activities they're doing. But if you see that they are doing things like, say, you know, one-on-one basketball, well, we know that that's going to cause them to need to be too close together. So they may need some help structuring the play that they're getting involved in. And I've even, again, it's funny, it's something I've done with some of my kids who have difficulty understanding social cues. So this is something I've done within the autism community, but and ADHD, where, you know, we kind of have kids who are up in your face. I've used the hula hoop, and it's the, you know what, we are all going to stay one hula hoop away from each other. And again, turn that into, it sounds silly, but turn that into a crazy craft activity where all the kids are going to get hula hoops and we're going to figure out a way to, strap them on. And I think some of you have seen the lovely hoop skirt, hoop dress jokes online, but almost coming up with something like that for the kids. But also don't set them up for failure. If you see that the games that they're playing are ones that they're just constantly going to be in each other's faces, it's time to redirect and move them onto something where that temptation isn't so strong.
Okay. So our next question is from Alexandra. It says, my anxiety is on bust because we thought it would be best if the kids went to grandma's. As a healthcare worker, we want to protect our family, but their absence is creating more anxiety than the fear of them getting sick by me bringing them home. Taking all necessary measures, is it okay to bring them back home? And does that really make sense now?
Again, that's one that I have to defer a little bit more to some of my public health colleagues, but you need to balance out your emotional needs and risk factors and those of your kids. If you really and truly feel that you're doing all the right things, you're doing all the safe things, you're protecting your family, if it keeps everybody happier having them with you, then that's the right choice for your family. If it causes more stress and it's easier to have them with Nan and Pop, then that's the right choice for a family. It's really looking at your own risk factors, but also your own psychological well-being.
Okay, so this one's not health related, but still a good question in case anybody missed it. It's from Barbara. What was the name of the monitoring system you mentioned for devices?
Oh, it's called Circle by Disney. I believe you can find it at, again, I'm not giving endorsements, but I know Best Buy sells it online. And I think it's about $130, and it just connects to your home Wi-Fi system. And then you set it up for all of the different devices in your house. I have a lot of families that I work with ADHD who found it really, really helpful, including the parents with ADHD, to set some limits for themselves. So maybe this is a time where you're finding it difficult to shut off the social media. It will do things like help you monitor how much time you're spending on Facebook or Twitter, but you can also literally have it shut off on you so that, okay, I've been on Facebook for half an hour, it's going to shut it off and I can't actually change it. Because sometimes as grown-ups, we need those monitoring tools as well.
Okay, our next question is from Heather. How can I help my 7-year-old cope at bedtime? She seems fine and excited most of the day, but cries for school, her friends, her teachers, and all her activities when she slows down to go to bed.
Yeah, bedtime is the witching hour for all anxious thoughts. Because we keep ourselves busy, we keep our brain busy, we keep our bodies busy all day long. It's when we get in bed and suddenly that little hamster wheel of all the worries starts to come out because we've been able to keep it distracted all day long. That might be a great time. First of all, use that as opportunity for discussion if talking it through is helping her. If talking it through isn't helping, then maybe again you help her to work through some breathing exercises, some nighttime relaxation stories. Maybe it's time to distract with some really silly bedtime reading, whatever it is that's going to work for her to work through it. You actually reminded me of another thing that I sometimes use with kids who have a lot of worries, but maybe they're ones that are popping up during the day. And what I kind of designate is a worry time. You can have between 7 and 7:15 tonight where we will talk about all of your worries. The rest of the day, we're going to put them aside. If you need to write them on a sticky note so we remember them, between 7 and 7:15, we're going to do that. And then we move on to something else. And that includes lots of wind down activities. That's the time to have a bath. That's the time to have the stories. That's, that's the snuggle time. But helping her to work through some of those feelings, you just need to gauge whether or not bedtime is the best time for that to happen, or whether you maybe need to create a time earlier in the evening to have that chat so that bedtime is really and truly the wind down time. Great question though, and really common.
Okay, so our next question is from Christy. Do you have any advice for those of us who work in healthcare and have to leave our kids every day?
It is a tough situation, and again, I think a lot of us are in this together. There's no question about that. Again, I guess it comes down to, do you have kids who are worried? Are you feeling worried? Figuring out that structure and that routine, and what are they doing all day long, is part of the tough thing. So again, reminding them all of the things that you are doing to keep yourself safe, talking to them and making sure, because there may be some kids, and I'm extrapolating here, so if I'm missing the worries, please write back the question and help clarify for me. But it could be that kids are worried about you getting sick. So really helping them to understand, here are all the things we do. Look, at the moment, we actually don't have any cases in the hospital. None of the patients are sick. We're doing okay. We have all the protective equipment. So providing kind of that reassurance. If it's your own worries about what's happening with your kids during the day, again, checking in a lot more, figuring out some ways to connect with them. Whether it's your own fears about what happens as you're going off and worries about, again, kind of coming home and infecting families. I know that's a really common fear. It's as much as you can be being proactive. I've seen some different advice coming around in terms of, being careful when you're coming home and changing out of your clothes. Like we're getting, every day, we're getting more and more guidance about ways to help keep us safe, and reminding your kids of all the things that we are doing to keep ourselves safe. And in some ways, reminding them that having to go to work at the hospital is possibly one of the safest places in the city at the moment, because boy, are we keeping those germs at bay and screening in ways that trying to go anywhere else you might not have. I don't know if that answered the question, so please feel free to pop back in if you want to clarify or ask further.
Okay, so this is a comment to the lady who has the newborn, from Brittany. She's a public health nurse. She says,
hey, thank you, Brittany.
Keep an eye on how baby looks and acts. Are they active? Are they settled after feeds? Things like that. So if you're seeing anything out of the ordinary, you should call and get some advice.
Thank you, Brittany.
Our next question is from Melissa. She says, I'm an RN, and how do I help my children understand that I have to work when everyone else is staying home?
Oh, really good question. Again, helping to talk about the idea that, mommy is someone who helps all the people, and talking to them about a little bit about your role, but also reminding them of, listen, there are a whole lot of other people out there who still have to go to work. Talk about the custodians, talk about the people working food services, talk about the people at the grocery store. Remind that it feels unfair. How come mommy has to go to work when all of my friends' parents are home? And kind of, again, just try to reframe it, and again, find out what they are resentful of, or what they are angry about, or what they're fearful about.
Okay, our next question comes from Jody. What if your children have very different coping styles? One child is all emotions on the floor, wanting to act and do things, and the other is holding it in, quiet, passive, wanting to retreat.
Great question. Challenging to balance as a parent, but it's important to validate all coping skills or coping styles as being equally valid and effective, and not trying to impose your own coping style if you have a kid who's reacting very differently. If you've got the kid who wants to get it all out, well, then we figure out ways to channel it and let it all out. If you've got the kid who has everything bottled up, do not torment them by constantly going up and going, how you feeling? How you doing? Let them come to you. Keep those lines of communication open. And in the same way, we talk about grief reactions or stress reactions. Everybody reacts differently. And even within us, we're all going to have our days where we're holding it together and our days where we're really having a tough time. And even just being able to acknowledge it, kind of go, overall, I'm doing okay, but today things got a little overwhelming, but tomorrow's going to be a new day. So also modeling for your kids that how you're coping, and that everybody copes differently.
Okay, our next, it's not a question, it's a little bit of praise from Lisa. Thank you so much for doing this session. I'm home with a 10-month-old and a 6-year-old, and it's extremely difficult and stressful. More of these types of sessions would be fantastic.
Oh my goodness, yes. I was going to say my hat goes off to Lisa. That's a busy household and a lot on the go. Listen, I'm happy to do this. I was overwhelmed by the response that came about. So if there are topics that people would like us to cover, again, within our psychology community, we apparently are suckers who say, oh yes, of course I'd be happy to do this. Because we enjoy making sure people are feeling supported. And if there's anything we can do to help out, reach out. So feel free to pass along suggestions for other topics or other things we can cover off.
Okay, our next question is from Aaron. How do I try to explain to my 6-year-old that he can't cuddle and hug me when I come home from work? I'm an LPN.
Okay. Are you feeling the need to kind of go home, do the clothing change, do the shower, do the everything you need to be doing? So this is going to sound like an awful analogy, and I'm not comparing your child to a pet, I promise. But one of the things that we do when we're doing dog training is teaching the dog to remain calm and cool when their owner first comes in the house, and to give them time to take off their coat. No, but that's part of puppy training that we do. And so it's usually by giving them an activity to do. Okay, mom's home. Mom needs a couple of minutes to go and shower and change. So when mom's coming home, we are going to go into the kitchen and fill up the kettle and plug it in, and we're going to make her a cup of tea to greet her when she comes home. I don't care if you drink the tea or not. You're giving your kid something to feel productive and active and introduce as part of their routine. So whatever that might look like in your house, but to give them something to buy you that few minutes of time, and then let them know that those snuggles are there and you're happy to do it.
Okay, our next question is from Kala. What is the role of the teacher at this time? Some teachers are setting up virtual classrooms. What are the reasonable expectations of some kind of continued academic guidance?
I have to field that to the lovely folks in administration at the Newfoundland and Labrador School Board. And again, I think that that's something like all of us, they have been struggling with, and it's been changing on a daily basis. I think that may look very different depending on what grade the teacher is doing. I think in the younger grades, it's more kind of connecting with the kids, making sure that they're still feeling part of, still feeling connected to the teacher, and maybe being given some games and some ideas. At the high school level, that's a different relationship, and maybe there is more pressure in terms of being given some guided material or some expectations. But my sense is that's something that the school board is working on rapidly, but like all of us, we're figuring it out on a daily basis, and we're figuring it out as we go along.
Okay, our next question is from Brittany. What about parents with shared custody of their children? Is it safe to be shuttling kids back and forth for weekend visitation?
It's a great question, and I think it depends on what the situation is in each household. If you have two households that are both in self-isolation, you've got no issue. I mean, yes, you're going out in the car, but that's about the only contact you're having. If you have one parent who's working from home and in isolation, and another who is having to go into work every day, that does provide an increased risk. However, kind of like with the earlier question, you have to balance out the percentage risk factor in terms of exposure and infection with the relationship and structure and continue, and a lot of it depends on the age of the kids as well. Some kids could be fine to say, okay, for the next month, we're going to go stay at dad's house. For others, it's the, no, I really need to be able to see both mom and dad every week in order to feel safe and secure and loved and cared for. So again, there's no right or wrong answer for that one. It's really kind of weighing your risk factors, weighing the needs of your kids. Sorry, I give a lot of really wishy-washy answers, but it really does depend on the individual situation.
So our next question is from Natalie. It says, do you have any suggestions for avoiding sibling fights Should I schedule a time where they do separate activities? I have 2 active boys, age 3 and 5.
Oh boy. Okay. First of all, sibling rivalries at those ages are normal and are going to be happening. That's, again, remember, normal developmental stages. Just because we're in a pandemic doesn't mean that our kids aren't going to do all the normal developmental annoying stuff that is part of their development. But I'd say, yes, if you can help them work on some time apart activities, as well as some shared activities, if you're able to work on some one-on-one with each while the other is off doing something else, that's awesome. Sometimes you have no choice and you're playing referee and everybody's feeling a little underfoot, and we make the best of it. But yeah, I mean, if you're able to make it work, that's fantastic.
Okay, our next question is from Kimberly. It says, my 4-year-old has become very emotional since daycare is closed. He's very uncooperative and becomes very angry when any kind of demand is put on him, like getting a bed. It's been a week of tears. What can I do to help him, to assure him it's okay?
No, I'm feeling for you there. And especially in young kids, I didn't talk about this earlier, we do expect some regression in behaviors. If you've got young ones who have just become potty trained, fully expect some regression around that. Fully expect some, again, some kids who have stopped sucking their thumb to start again, kids who were sleeping independently to kind of want to come back in bed. That's all a normal, totally normal reaction to disrupted life and disrupted routine. So for a little bit, picking your battles, figure out what are the non-negotiables. Yeah, kid, you're getting in the bathtub. Sorry, that's not one that you can argue with me on. But then figure out what are the things that you can do to create fun and warmth and nurture. And particularly, again, going back to that need for routine, that's a kid who is used to the routine of going to daycare and suddenly that's not there in their life. So maybe even we figure out ways to play daycare. What are the things that were part of the structure of the daycare world, whether it was first we have playtime and then we have snack time and then, whatever those things were that were part of the daycare routine, figure out how you might be able to mimic those at home and talk very actively about we're gonna play daycare today.
Are you still there, Janine?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
The next question is from Kathy. How can I find a balance between my own mental health and parenting? I'm a single parent with limited supports.
Oh, Kathy, this is the time to be reaching out and looking for, if those supports aren't in your life right now, reaching out and finding them, whether it's going through your EAP, whether it's reaching out to friends, even ones that you might not normally be reaching out to and saying, I'm struggling, guys. Again, the amount of support that is out there is enormous. As I said right at the very beginning, you got to take care of yourself before you can take care of your kids. It's that whole analogy of when you're on the airplane about you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you try to do that for the kids and people around you. You are not being a bad parent by engaging in self-care. In fact, that's the sign of a caring and strong parent, is taking care of your needs to make sure that you are then equipped to meet the needs of your kids. So my big message today for everybody is cut yourself some slack. None of us have ever been through this. We're figuring out on a daily basis, but really do engage in all the self-care you can and reach out for help. There's lots of it out there.
Okay, so this one's going to be a little quick one. Andrea, best app to shut off phones for teens?
Oh, well, like I say, the Circle by Disney will do that one for you. And otherwise, depending on what phone system you're using, a lot of them have parental controls that you can take a look at. Unfortunately, a lot of the teens are smarter than we are and figure out ways to disable things, but check with the individual phone, or like I say, check out that Circle program.
Okay, our next question is from Alice. Both myself and my husband are working from home, so that adds some additional challenges to parenting during this pandemic. We still only have a few hours in the evening to make our kids' lives feel normal. We are suggesting structure during the day, but it's harder to ensure they are doing what we're suggesting. Any suggestions for this particular situation?
Well, and some of it's going to depend on what kind of work you are doing from home, but maybe it's a time where if you're able to restructure how some of that time is spent so that perhaps the leisure family time is actually maybe in the afternoon for a couple of hours. And then in the evening, you can get the kids settled down with some TV or a video or something and allow you to go back to work to finish up some of those tasks. So it doesn't have to look like a Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Again, it depends on the work demands. It depends on what you're being asked to do, of course. But if you can show a little bit of creativity and flexibility in terms of how you're doing that, or even if you and your husband can spell off a little bit. The other thing I'm really and truly hoping is, as this is kind of developing, the employers of the world are going to appreciate that you cannot expect full productivity when you have parents who are also trying to cope with little kids in the house. That's just not realistic, and it's not good for anybody's long-term health. And maybe it's talking to the employer in terms of negotiating things a little bit, but I think we're going to see some new standards, and I think we're going to see, again, a little bit of flexibility coming.
Okay, our next question is from Pilak. I work with the newcomer community in our province. Parenting is already tough and challenging for this demographic group of people, but it has become harder during the pandemic. What is your suggestion for this particular group in our community? And what are some things you've been doing, trying something that doesn't involve internet?
Oh, good question. And that is really tough. You're quite right. That's a very vulnerable population to begin with, and one that doesn't have the same kind of social supports or social networks. And trying to, again, I'm hoping, trying to help them reach out and connect to people, maybe not electronically, maybe we're actually, heaven forbid, making phone calls. I know it sounds shocking and old-fashioned, but it's, I don't have a good answer for you. I'm going to be brutally honest. It's trying to help support them as best as possible, and at the same time figuring out ways to get kids outside, get some exercise, get them out of the house a little bit, and figure out ways to connect them within the community, whether it's virtually, whether it's through a window, whether it's by phone. But you're quite right. That is a group that I think we're going to see increasing needs for, and we're going to have to scramble to figure out how we can help out.
Okay.
Sorry, that wasn't a great answer. I'm sorry.
We have a question from Sarah. My 7-year-old is asking many more questions about death and dying. He's afraid his grandparents are going to die very soon. I'm very open to these important conversations, but looking for advice on how to navigate those intense questions without lying to him. Side note, we're not a religious family.
Okay. Really excellent question. And again, for a 7-year-old who is kind of being exposed to the concept of death within their immediate family, that's a really normal stage. Kind of 6, 7, 8 is often when kids start exploring the whole concept of what is death, what is dying, am I going to die, are you and dad going to die, are my grandparents going to die? Really distressing for the adults in the life, because also kids tend to ask some fairly graphic questions and disturbing questions. So be prepared for the, so what happens if you get buried in the ground, which sound really insensitive, but they really and truly are exploring their understanding. So again, it comes back to discussing any tough topic. Ask them what they know, what are they curious about, what are they worried about, what are they wondering about, and then don't be afraid to, in an age-appropriate way, ask all those questions. You don't need to lie to them. I mean, it's okay to, you know, to start that exploration of, we all are going to die someday. Sometimes we die very young, sometimes we die very old. We hope that that's not something that's going to happen in the near future, and sometimes we explore it with pets or people that we've known, but just get them to explore their feelings and not shy away from it, and be as honest as you can. It's a tough conversation, but it's an important one. And again, it's a really developmentally normal one.
Thanks, Janine. I'm just trying to scroll through the questions now. There's some just comments, so I don't want to have to read everything out.
Okay.
My concern is with those kids and teens who already have social anxiety as to how they may fare when this is all said and done. I know parents worry that this goes against what they've been trying in terms of exposure.
Yep. Very good worry. It also goes against the exposure therapy that we teach for everybody with OCD. All of the things we are being asked to do right now are contradictory to a lot of our typical therapy interventions, which is providing some challenges for sure. I think the best thing you can do for now is focus on the here and now. As I said earlier, focus on one day at a time, 1 week at a time. We don't know what this is going to look like long term. Encouraging your kids to keep up their social relationships. For a lot of kids with social anxiety, actually, this is ideal. They're not having to deal with the face-to-face, and you can help them navigate the online world in terms of helping to keep them connected. So in the same way that for some of our kids with social anxiety, we used to have to, kind of help them schedule and plan play dates. Now maybe you're helping them plan a Skype activity or helping them to structure the, hey, you know what? Here's a really cool cooperative game that you can do with a friend. Let's set them up with somebody. So help them to facilitate those ongoing relationships, but also knowing that in some cases, the kids are loving this. They're really enjoying the fact that that's one pressure that's off their plate, and we'll help them address it when the time comes, and we'll work through it.
Okay. Our next question is from Margaret. I'm hosting 2 high school international students. What resources are available to help them keep up their skills, primarily their English skills?
A really excellent question. Again, I would reach out to their school, reach out to the school administration there and see what resources they can provide, because they are the experts in that area.
Okay, so we have a comment from Gloria that says, hi, thank you, Janine. There is a platform launched on the NLESD site called Learning at Home. This has resources for well-being, math, literacy, and passion projects. Check it out. Thanks again for this webinar.
There you go. See, it's the collective wisdom of all of us. I sure don't know all the answers, but I'm glad that we've got people helping us and contributing. So that one sounds fantastic. I will be checking that out, and I encourage anybody listening to check it out.
All right, so I think we're going to cut it off there, Janine. I know there's some questions we didn't get to, so don't worry, I will forward them on for an answer. There's some questions about the audio or the slides being available. So the audio will be posted to the Eastern Health intranet. So unless you're an employee of Eastern Health, you won't have access to the recording. But if you want a copy of the slides, you can send an email to judy.cribb@easternhealth.ca, and that's crib with 2 B's.
And as I've said, if there's enough interest, I am more than open. If people have found this helpful, I'm more than open to figuring out a way to repeat it next week, or we'll figure out something. I want to make sure if people are finding this information useful, I want to make sure that it gets to everybody who needs it.
Yes, absolutely. We do have a lot of comments about how helpful this was. So as I said at the beginning, me and Janine will work together to figure out how she can kind of reach out to everybody. So if she does a Facebook Live, then people who weren't able to log in today will be able to log in and hear and ask questions, etc. So other than that, everybody, I hope everybody's staying safe and staying well. I know emotionally and physically now it is a tough time, but we'll get through it. We're newfies. So thank you very much, Janine, and we will talk to you later.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. Hopefully it was helpful.